Hi everyone, and welcome to English for You. I'm Pat.
And I'm Mike.
And today we're talking about all things fairy tales.
Yeah, we've got a great title there. Magic, Fairies, and Happy Endings. Your guide to Tell a Fairy Tale Day. Now, the first part I'm totally fine with. Magic, fairies, happy endings. I'm thinking, yeah, fairy tales. But then we get to Tell a Fairy Tale Day. Is this like Halloween is a special day, Valentine's Day, Double 10 Day?
Pretty
There's
much.
a Tell a Fairy Tale Day? I guess we'll find out in the article. But since we're on the topic of fairy tales, I'll ask you this question, Pat. Do you have a favorite fairy tale of all the fairy tales that are out there?
I was thinking of the different stories I've told, but one that I really enjoyed as a kid was the Three Billy Goats Gruff.
Okay.
They cross a bridge to get to a nice meadow. A troll jumps out, and the little one says, "Eat my brother." The middle one says, "Oh, eat my brother." And then the big one comes along and just smashes the troll away. And as the oldest of three brothers, I always thought this was cool in my family because it meant I was the cool big goat who smashed the troll out of the way.
But weren't you afraid that your younger brothers would do that to you in real life and you'd end up facing some giant monster of a guy who wanted to punch somebody?
No, because I was the big Billy goat. And,
okay.
There was the bonus that the troll might eat my annoying little brothers.
That's possible. That's possible.
It's all good, this story. But what is the idea of this Tell a Fairy Tale Day? Let's read through the first day of the article and learn more.
Reading. Magic, Fairies, and Happy Endings. Your guide to Tell a Fairy Tale Day. February 26th is a special day called Tell a Fairy Tale Day. It's a day when we are encouraged to read and learn about fairy tales from around the world. But before we begin to do that, let's answer an important question. What are fairy tales? Fairy tales belong to a genre of writing that features wonderful, fantastic characters and lots of magic. The characters often include things like fairies, elves, and witches, and the setting almost always feels very magical. And of course, a typical fairy tale usually starts with the words, "Once upon a time." These days, fairy tales are aimed at younger audiences, although adults can enjoy them too. However, this wasn't always the case. Before the 19th century, fairy tales tended to be aimed at adults and could be very scary indeed. They certainly weren't something people would approve of young children reading. Fortunately, that has all changed. Now people of all ages can enjoy a good fairy tale this Tell a Fairy Tale Day.
So the article begins and says February 26th is a special day called Tell a Fairy Tale Day. So this is obviously one of those that's maybe been just created, maybe by the UN or a children's organization somewhere to promote reading and fairy tales. It's not going to be like a day off. You won't get to skip school because of this day, but it's to promote this kind of thing and reading and the idea of it. But a fairy tale. Now, we're going to talk in detail in the first part of this article about what is a fairy tale. So in brief, it's just a kind of fanciful story for kids. It might have talking animals. It'll have a bit of magic. We're going to get into that detail in a moment. So I'll keep this brief and just give an example sentence for it. This fairy tale is about a princess and a kangaroo. Must be an Aussie fairy tale.
Yeah, there's not enough kangaroos and koalas in fairy tales. I guess they're older than Australia in many ways. So there you go, the princess and the kangaroo. I'm excited for Disney's version of that when it ever comes out. Back to the article. So what is Tell a Fairy Tale Day? Well, it's a day when you tell a fairy tale, is what you're thinking and what I'm thinking. But let's find out a little more accurately what it is. It's a day when we are encouraged to read and learn about fairy tales from around the world. Okay, I kind of like that because, you know, when you think of fairy tales, a lot of us think of the ones, maybe if you're like me, that have been turned into movies and Disney cartoons. Cinderella, Snow White, Rapunzel, you know, things like that. But there are many, many other fairy tales out there from all around the world. So it might be good to encourage people to, you know, sort of expand their fairy tale knowledge, learn about the fairy tales that haven't been made into cartoons and movies, and maybe give those ones a little bit of love too. So again, as Pat said, it's not a holiday. You don't have to do this. You're not going to get in trouble with the government if you don't tell a fairy tale on this day. But you are encouraged to tell a fairy tale and learn about them too. To encourage, this is a verb that basically means to fill someone with courage, to fill them with spirit and confidence. When you're telling your friend before the big game, you can do it, I know you can win, you're the best, you've been practicing so hard. You're encouraging that person. So when you're using words and your energy and maybe your body language or just your voice saying cheer and go and that kind of thing, you're encouraging your favorite team or your favorite player or your best friend or someone in your family to go out and do well, work hard, try their best, that kind of thing. For example, Derek's mom always encourages him to be brave and do his best.
So this is the idea. We're being encouraged, we're kind of being urged and given the confidence and the opportunity to read these fairy tales.
So we hopefully will go, okay, I will, that kind of thing.
But we have to stop and think, as the article points out. But before we begin to do that, let's answer an important question. What are fairy tales? Now, I kind of defined this briefly when we looked at it as our vocabulary word or noun phrase, but now we're really going to get into the detail of what makes a fairy tale. And this has actually been studied by people at quite a high level of academic, PhD level kind of studies.
One of my last papers for my anthropology degree was all about fairy tales.
Nice.
As a way of passing on, wisdom and stuff in a culture long before books and movies and things like that. So yeah, fairy tales are very interesting, and there's a lot more than just, a girl biting an apple or a witch doing some bad magic. Well, what are fairy tales? The next sentence gives us a good definition, a good idea. Fairy tales belong to a genre of writing that features wonderful, fantastic characters and lots of magic. Absolutely. You can't really think of any fairy tale that's well known, certainly, that doesn't have wonderful, fantastic characters, lots of magic, probably a happy ending of some kind, probably some kind of good life message, life wisdom hidden in there, and also, maybe a scary bad guy. There's all sorts of these things that we associate with this genre of writing or film or book or anything like that. What is a genre? This is basically a type or a style of something, all right? We often use this when talking about something like music or movies. If someone says, I like music, you don't just assume that they like Taylor Swift and they like Mozart and they like, all the strangest bands that you've never heard of. No, some people might like all that, but people generally like certain genres. I like pop. I like rock. I like hip-hop. I like jazz. Those are genres. I like to see movies. Well, you might not like to see all types of movies. You might like horror movies, action movies, rom-coms, sci-fi movies, dramas, things like that. Those are genres of things. So we break down the style of something, how it's different from other things. We give that style a name, and it becomes a genre.
And so this genre of stories that aren't just written, they're often only spoken. That's how they would have been at first. But they feature wonderful, fantastic characters, fairies, talking animals, and all of that, and magic. And here we're using the word feature as a verb. If something features a thing, then that thing is a feature of it. To feature something means it contains it. It's an important part of it. For example, you can talk about people in movies. This movie features these actors. This movie features some exciting battle scenes. This movie features a love story on a great big boat that sinks.
Titanic.
Yes, that's the one. Here's another example. This film features the last performance of the famous actor James Dean.
Okay, so that might be one and the only reason you need to see that movie, right? It's a special thing about it. It might be enough to get you to say, I want to see it. Just that one feature. All right, back to the article. Oh, no, we'd have this one more word, fantastic, right? Wonderful, fantastic characters. Now, yes, you might think of fantastic as a word that you use when things are really great. How are you feeling? Fantastic. I feel great today. How was your holiday? It was fantastic. It was wonderful. It was amazing. It was awesome. But here we're using it more in the sort of unbelievable, sort of like something that you wouldn't normally expect to see, and it kind of seems to be something that was made up, something that doesn't exist in the real world. I think there's a Harry Potter sort of movie, right? Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. So in that movie, the fantastic creatures would be dragons or griffins or things that don't exist in the real world. When we read fairy tales or watch science fiction or fantasy movies, we're looking to enjoy the world of the fantastic characters. Superheroes are also kind of fantastic. They're more than natural, more than normal. They break the rules of what we see in our normal daily world or daily lives. It's amazing and incredible and filled with imagination. It's fantastic.
So what kind of fantastic characters do we mean? The article says the characters often include things like fairies, elves, and witches, and the setting almost always feels very magical. So the characters they're not just standard human, normal people, they're fantastic creatures, but the world itself is magical. Maybe the trees talk, or they have different color leaves, or there are two suns that live up in the sky, that kind of thing. And inhabiting these magical worlds are things like fairies. Now, fairy, depending on the culture you come from and the stories that culture tells, this could be anything from a small little creature with wings that lives in a flower to a kind of a dark, scary creature that steals children in the night and makes your crops fail. So there are millions of different types of fairy stories, and the fairies could be almost anything, but the most traditional kind of common view is it's the tiny winged thing that lives in a flower.
Like Tinkerbell in the Peter Pan movie. Yeah, that's a kind of fairy. Sure, that's the thing about these fantastic creatures. They're not real. We don't have pictures of them, and they don't live in zoos. So kind of each writer comes up with their own little different idea on what these can be. But there are some general things. With elves, that's the next one. The singular is elf with an F. The plural would be elves, E-L-V-E-S. So be careful with the spelling on that. But this is another fantastic creature. There are no real elves, as far as we know. But elves are probably a little bit more human-like than fairies. They're more human-sized. If we're thinking of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, those elves, that would be a Legolas, right? Orlando Bloom. And people who saw those movies, he was very tall and skinny and handsome with the pointed ears. Very good at using a bow and arrow. And yeah, elves in those stories are often kind of connected to the natural world. You'll have wood elves or things like that, and they protect the forest, and they get magic from the forest. Maybe not as much magic as a wizard or something, but they have sort of natural magic that comes from the living world around them. Generally, they're good, right? Elves are usually good. But I think there's like dark elves, which sort of use black magic and a little bit scarier. Maybe if you had a really bad elf, it might be even a witch.
Yeah, a witch is another typical fairy tale character. They're usually old women who use magic and do things like turn handsome princes into toads, make people fall asleep for 100 years. But as with a lot of these kind of stories and characters, witches' age can vary. You can have good witches, like in The Wizard of Oz. You've got the Wicked Witch as well as the good witches. So sometimes they can be evil or good. They can be old and young. And as long as it's a woman who uses magic, the word witch can often apply.
Is wizard the male version of that?
Kinda, yeah. Again, depends on which stories and which writers.
Again, a lot of the writers will change this. So wait, could I say Hermione Granger is a witch?
I would say so.
If Harry Potter is a wizard?
Yeah, I would say so, of course.
But she might not like that.
No.
So you might ask her, are you a wizard? Are you a witch? She might get upset. Anyways, back to the article. And of course, so here's another thing that we often find with fairy tales. And of course, a typical fairy tale usually starts with the words, everyone say it with me, once upon a time, and then probably ends with, and they lived happily ever after, or something like that. So there are certain things that we find in the style of the fairy tale that even with the first 4 words, you start reading once upon a time and you go, oh, it's a fairy tale.
Yeah.
So it's never once upon a time James Bond was shooting a bad Russian spy.
No,
that doesn't happen.
Okay, so that's what fairy tales are. And we move on in the article to say these days, fairy tales are aimed at younger audiences, although adults can enjoy them too. Yeah, a lot of my 2-year-old son's books are fairy tale stories. That's, read a lot of them to him at bedtime.
And do you enjoy them too as you're reading them?
I often do,
There
yes.
you go.
And we say these days to mean in the current times and in the modern times. And we also show that that's not only this is how things are now, but we're kind of implying that things were different before.
That's right, and that's made very clear in the next sentence. However, this wasn't always the case. This, what we just said before, that fairy tales are aimed at young audiences, but adults can enjoy them too. But that situation that we know today, fairy tales are for kids, but some other people like them, this wasn't always the case. Be not the case, or be the case. This is a phrase that means to be true or to be a fact in a particular situation. If you say that something is the case, then you mean that it is true or correct or accurate. If it is not the case, then that information is not quite right.
Right, this use of however to modify the rest of the sentence, we can do it with lots of different words. It's almost always an adverb. So however is an adverb that shows a contrast, but we could use other adverbs to show the manner of something and modify the rest of that sentence. So if we start a sentence with fortunately, the sentence we know is going to be giving lucky news, good news. If we start a sentence with surprisingly, then what follows will be surprising. Or usually, then what follows will be the usual thing, the normal thing that happens. Here's another one. Typically, Carl works for 8 hours every day. So by starting the sentence with typically, we're saying this is what normally happens. This is the usual thing. All right, let's move on to the next part of the article, and we see before the 19th century, fairy tales tended to be aimed at adults and could be very scary indeed. So yeah, read the Brothers Grimm. A lot of people are dying. A lot of nasty things are happening to different characters. And so we say they're scary. They're frightening. They'll make you have kind of, I don't want to listen to this, or this might give me bad dreams. I'm uncomfortable by just even thinking about this idea. It's making me feel afraid. For example, we could say, wow, that roller coaster was scary. I think I screamed the whole time.
Indeed. This is an adverb we use to emphasize kind of like the meaning of very. You use indeed at the end of a clause to give force to the word very or to emphasize a particular word. For example, we would say, please bring enough clothes with you. The weather in Alaska is very cold indeed.
So these old fairy stories, these fairy tales were indeed scary. And as the article says, they certainly weren't something people would approve of young children reading.
Really?
Yeah, they would go, that's all the blood, all the killing, all that sort of stuff. We can't have our young...
Not for kids.
Yeah, not for kids. I don't approve of that. If you approve of something, then you say, okay, I'll allow it. I think it's appropriate. I like it. Go ahead. You've got the green light. We often use it with approve of a particular noun or a phrase or something like that. You can also say, I approve, like I asked my boss for some time off and he approved, which meant he thought it was a good idea and I could do it. Here's another sentence using approve of in the negative way, like in our article. Mabel doesn't approve of her children using swear words. If they use bad words, they're in a lot of trouble.
Fortunately, we read, that has all changed. So yeah, fairy tales used to be pretty scary, but luckily or fortunately, that has all changed. So kids now can read fairy tales and they won't be terrified and frightened by all the horrible things that happen. The fairy tales have changed a little bit.
Yep, and as we conclude this part of the article, now people of all ages can enjoy a good fairy tale this Tell a Fairy Tale Day. So it brings us back to this kind of special day where we started the article about February 26th being a day where we can think and tell fairy tales and share them with people and maybe hear a nice new one. And we're going to hear one, in fact, in tomorrow's article, but first we're going to go to our For You Chat question.
For You Chat.
So our question is, do you like to read fairy tales? Why or why not?
That's an interesting question because I haven't read fairy tales in quite a while, but yeah, I think they would be interesting. I have a couple of interesting books of Japanese fairy tales, and I always find those to be quite fun because you can see that some of the stories are similar to Western fairy tales. Some are very different but give the same message, and some are just strange, but they're always interesting.
Read a few kind of Chinese ones from sort of the 100,000 years ago, or however long ago. That were a lot of fox spirits, a lot of zombies and dead, and kind of strange stuff, gods and monsters. It's all quite interesting stuff. But yeah, I do like fairy tales because it's not much of a big step from fairy tales to fantasy. And a lot of writers, famous writers, have played around with fairy tales, looking at them in different ways. The trilogy, the Kingkiller Chronicles, Wise Man's Fear, Doors of Stone, does look at fairy tales in a different sort of light. Okay. So there's a lot that can be done with kind of playing around with some of the traditions and ideas and shaping them up in a new way. So I do enjoy those. Yeah. They feel like the kind of stories you'd quite happily tell to each other, and people did tell to each other. But that's all the time we have for today. Join us again tomorrow for a reading of a fairy tale. See you then. Bye for now.
Take care.
Vocabulary Review.
Fairy tale. This fairy tale is about a girl who saves her 11 brothers after they are changed into swans. Encourage. Our teacher encourages us to watch movies in English to help us with our listening skills. Feature. This old church features beautiful painted ceilings and pretty windows full of colored glass. Scary. That movie was so scary that I couldn't finish watching it. Indeed. I went to Benny's house yesterday, and it seems he's very rich indeed. His house is huge. Approve. The boss didn't approve of the plan and asked us to make some changes.
智慧小补帖
Genre. Fantastic. Elf. Witch.
以上节目是由活用空中美语制作。活用空中美语杂志，请洽询全国各大书店。如欲索取试听教材，请来电02-2364-4000 02-2364-4000，或上网查询，网址是 www.english4u.net www.english4u.net